Welcome back to The Haunted Beard. My name is Jake, and I have been making my way through the entire Halloween franchise, and with the exception of the first film, these have all been first-time watches for me. And I'm at the point in the series where we have gotten to the reboot stage. So today I'm going to be talking about Rob Zombie's Halloween from 2007. So let's get into it. The way this starts off, and it's obviously quite similar to the original film, but what mainly separates this from the original film is that we spend a large portion of time with Michael Myers as a child. We get to see some of his upbringing and childhood, him as, I believe, he's about 10 years old-ish, and we see the whole tragedy with the murders and him going into the institution and talking with Loomis, and then the film jumps to 15 years later, and then the rest of the film plays out pretty similar to the original Halloween film. He's tracking down his, I guess, kind of long-lost baby sister, which is Laurie Strode, and to kill off the last member of his bloodline. So the main issue, or at least one of the predominant issues that I have with this movie, is the first 35 minutes are really all prelude, and that's the time that we spend with Myers as a kid. And by and large, this movie shouldn't start until 35 minutes into it, at least in my opinion. First of all, we're introduced to Myers and his home life, and it's just horrible. His mom and her boyfriend are just constantly arguing and yelling at each other. It's just a very hostile and terrible and volatile, home life that he has. And some of the dialogue here, especially between Michael's mom and her boyfriend, is just awful. And not even necessarily, well, at least the written dialogue is to a degree, but just in terms of, it's just the most crude, vile dialogue you've probably ever heard. And it's almost like so egregious, it's kind of ridiculous, and it's kind of unbelievable in a way. It's so over the top and so extreme, and I think to the film's detriment. And what else I think the film kind of gets wrong by giving us this prelude and this whole sort of introductory act is that by showing us Myers as a kid, and especially the environment he grew up in as a kid, you kind of can't help but sympathize with him and feel for him a little bit. And it sort of humanizes him, which I don't know if it's really necessarily the best decision. It makes us feel and sympathize for Michael Myers, and to me, any sort of humanization of him kind of takes away from sort of his image, his mystique. And I'd rather just have it that he is just simply the personification of evil. I don't want to know the backstory. I don't want to know about him. I think it kind of takes away from just sort of who he is. And Myers, to me, is he's a person, but he's just simply evil in person form. He's the personification of evil, and anything to humanize him, I think, just kind of takes away from that overall mystique. And I think that's what the film does. Once the murders in the house happen, and Michael kills his sister and his sister's boyfriend and his mom's boyfriend. So it was a triple murder. The cops show up. He's put in the institution. He meets Loomis. And you can kind of see through some of these exchanges that, he has some mental health issues and challenges. And again, that kind of also sort of makes you sympathize for him, that the film sort of portrays him as this victim. And I mean, he is to a degree. He's growing up in just an extremely verbally abusive, especially home, and just a horrible situation. And again, any sort of humanization, it makes you sympathize with him. Any sort of portrayal of him as a victim, I think, just kind of takes away in his, again, overall mystique. And these scenes with Loomis in the institution don't really do anything. other than just, again, sort of get you to sympathize with him, which I think is detrimental to the character of Michael Myers. And so these scenes, they don't really advance the story anymore. There's not really any character development outside of what we, already know about him. And so to me, the film it's about an hour and 45 minutes long. But the first 35 minutes, to me, it's like if I was ever to watch this again, I would just start 35 minutes in. Like, that's your start of the movie. Start it right there when Myers is grown up and gets ready to bust out. That whole first act of the film, I think, can just be completely eliminated, and I think you just have a better movie. You have a 70-minute cut of Halloween that I think just functions overall as a film. It functions better overall as a film. Now, one of the things that the film does do, and this is a bit of a mixed element and kind of speaks back to why I think the whole first act is detrimental, is when Michael makes his breakout, he starts killing security guards to get out. They're getting ready to transfer him, and he starts killing cops and security guards to get out. Is it does a good job of kind of getting you to sort of lose that sympathy and remember sort of who Michael Myers is. And if it does a good job at doing that, then what was the point, again, of that whole first section of trying to set up his childhood and sort of flesh him out as a character and where he came from? There's the one scene in particular. Danny Trejo is in this movie, which I didn't know, and so it was kind of a surprise to see him. And there's a couple scenes involving him and Myers when he's in the institution, and they have not really a relationship, but there's a bit of a connection there. Trejo doesn't treat him like trash like everybody else does. But then when Myers is breaking out, you think maybe there's a little chance of hope that Myers has some sympathy, that he's going to take it easy on Danny Trejo, but he doesn't. And he ends up killing him. And it's an effective scene, and it kind of carries it carries some weight to it, because you realize now that this guy has no sympathy. There's no humanity behind his eyes. He is purely and simply evil. And so that's a pretty effective scene for me. So let's talk about the actual filmmaking. For the most part, I'm not a huge fan of the way that Rob Zombie shot this film. And there's a few sequences that work pretty well, but so much of it is there's a lot of very tight close-ups, extreme close-ups, sort of a lot of, sort of focus adjustments where some shots are, barely focused. And I think he's just trying to do this really sort of raw, grungy sort of look to it. But I think the majority, if not all of this film is shot handheld. And especially the more, intense horror scenes, the kill scenes are all done with, I'd say, very shaky handheld camera. And it's just tough. It gets to be just too much. A lot of times you can't really tell what's going on, and it's just shaky cam and fast moving and quick cuts, and it just kind of is just distracting. It's too much. It feels like we're almost watching it like an action movie, like a Jason Bourne action movie in a way. And obviously there is a degree of action to this film, but I just, by and large, wasn't a fan of the way it was shot. It was like every once in a while he would cut to a wider shot and kind of hold the camera steady for a minute, and I was like, oh geez, okay. It's like you could finally kind of breathe and actually sort of get your bearings, and it was just kind of nice to actually cut to a wider shot for a minute. And some of that, up close shaky cam, it can work well to a degree, but I think he just kind of overuses it here, and it's just too much. Now, by and large, this movie plays out like, if you've seen the original Halloween, you're going to be pretty familiar with the beats that this film takes. It does add a couple new things in, which I think were good decisions and I think plays out well. You get, I think, a little bit more personality and a little more character development to Laurie Strode, at least just in terms of comparing this film to the original film and what we learned about Laurie Strode from the original Halloween compared to this. She has a little bit more personality. I think her character is just a little more fleshed out. They show some some scenes with her and her parents and kind of establish their sort of relationship. And he does something interesting in that Myers actually attacks and kills Laurie Strode's parents or adopted parents, which was kind of an unexpected moment for me. That's not something that happens in the original film, and it's pretty shocking and unexpected. So that sequence worked pretty well for me and definitely added a bit of a surprise to the movie. Now, the kills in this movie are aplenty. There is a handful more here than in the original. And the kills here are brutal and gruesome and gory and bloody. It's by far the goriest out of any of the Halloween films so far. And anything that's kind of added to this that is not in the original is, it seems like, is just added for the sake of adding more kills, which fair enough. I mean, I like kills if they're handled well. Some of the kills are good. Some of them, like I said, you kind of miss out just because of the just kind of overuse of the shaky cam. I feel like in trying to add more kills, we can't really savor the kills that we do get as much as we do in the original. The original is more concerned about sort of building the suspense and building the tension, whereas this is more concerned about just sort of delivering as much carnage candy, and as many bloody kills to you as you can possibly handle. And so it's just kind of a personal preference. I tend to prefer a little bit more of the style of the original than this. And I wish he would maybe have been a little more patient, a little more drawn out some of the suspense and the tension instead of just kind of ramming it down your throat. But there are a handful of pretty good kills here. I just wish we kind of would have got some tension building and would have been able to savor them a bit more than we do. I will say the actor that portrays Michael Myers, Tyler Mane, is pretty solid in this. And it's been hard for me to kind of differentiate, at least just with first-time watches, major differences between the performances in the Michael Myers characters. But this is one that I think Tyler Mane's performance definitely sort of stands out. I mean, this guy is just a hulk of a man. I think the actor is like 6'8". I mean, he's just an absolute towering beast of a human, and just his physicality and just sheer, size and presence, you kind of really feel just an impact there with Michael Myers. And every time he's, walking down somebody, just seeing the sheer size of him, it definitely adds an effective element to the movie that I think is more so than probably in any of the other Halloweens that I've seen so far. I think probably my favorite sequence in the entire film comes about 80 minutes in, where Laurie and the kids are going back across the street to check on Annie, and they find the massacre. And this is changed up different from the original film. So I was not totally expecting this to happen. I think it's a nice little kind of a surprise and a little change of pace there. And I thought this entire sequence was quite good. It's really intense. We do get, I think, some of the scenes of Michael coming in and attacking Laurie and chasing her and the kids too, and Annie's still alive. It's really intense. The adrenaline's pumping, and I think this is probably the strongest sequence in the entire movie. I also like too that Zombie puts the kids in more direct danger at this too, which really kind of amplifies things as well. There's a scene where Laurie and the kids go back to the other house and they lock themselves in a bathroom, and they know Michael Myers is there, and he's pounding on the door and things like that, and the kids are just screaming their heads off, and you're kind of like, holy smokes, when you bring the kids into this, it definitely amplifies things. And so there's probably about that 10-minute sequence there is really strong, and I think a standout in the film. I also like that they gave us a bit more of a showdown between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. There's not a whole lot of a sort of a battle or a fight, if you will, in the first film, whereas this film, we really kind of get a chance to kind of see them sort of go at it. And it's obviously more Laurie sort of defending herself and stuff, but there's really more of a battle and a showdown that I appreciate we got to see more of. And I really like that aspect of the film as well. Overall, this is a decent watch. Like I said, I have an issue with the entire first third of the film. I think is just kind of pointless, and a lot of the ways some of the scenes are handled, I think, just is not super effective. But there are a handful of pretty good sequences in there, and the kills and the blood are aplenty. So if you're into that, you'll probably like it. But as for me, this is kind of overall sort of a middle of the road mixed bag kind of movie. There are some good stuff that I liked. But there is a handful of stuff that just didn't really work for me. So I'm probably going to be at like a 5 out of 10 for this. And so that is, yeah, that's probably going to be my grade for Rob Zombie's Halloween. So those are my thoughts. And up next, Zombie made a sequel 2 years later, Halloween 2, coming up next. And we will see you then on The Haunted Beard.